Okay. So, hi everyone. Welcome. Oh, hi there.
That's Wilder.
Hi, Wilder. How old are you?
You gotta be quiet. He's 6.
Nice. That's a great age. Whoa. A scary age, too. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Hey.
That's really cool.
Council.
Welcome, everyone, to Double Canopy. I'm Joe. Today we have Jake Dailey. He is the founder and CEO of U.S. Rake Force up in Olympia, Washington. Good morning, Jake, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So I apologize. I usually have a lot of questions prepared for my guests. I found you yesterday, and I was very eager to have a conversation about Hugelkultur. And I know you do a lot of that, but also a lot more. So we'll talk about everything that you do. But I want to focus on Hugelkultur for sure. But tell me about U.S. Rake Force and how long you've been doing that.
U.S. Rake Force is a regenerative agroforestry startup. We started in 2020, and really we started before that as a result of the former president standing on a burnt foundation in Paradise, California, and saying that the president of Finland told him that we needed to rake our forests.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 months later, he started the U.S. Space Force. Me and my best friend were out we've got about 50 goats. We do hazardous fuels reduction. So we're out in the woods with goats and chainsaws, and we're doing this hazardous fuels reduction. Then the president said that, and we're like, what the heck did he just say? Like, rake our forests? I'm a veteran. And when he started the Space Force, I was like, what are you doing? This is low-hanging fruit. You should start the U.S. Rake Force. And my thought was restarting the CCC,
Mm-hmm.
the Civilian Conservation Corps,
Yeah.
and running it under the DoD, and because that's where the budget is, that's where the money is.
Mm-hmm.
The Department of Defense gets all of the money, and that doesn't leave room for any other services. And what I see as a major problem in our country is the lack of work being done in our forests, especially in the wildland-urban interface, where this work is actual defense against a known enemy, which would be catastrophic fire due to human-caused climate change. So my thought for Rake Force is to be a regenerative climate change fighting force.
And it's offensive because we are only playing defense when the big fires come through, and we are always playing catch up.
And it's more expensive that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like preventative maintenance is cheaper than response all the time.
Yeah, and from a regenerative perspective, it's also more beneficial to do this preventative work because it clearly, measurably adds to the fertility of the soils and the forest.
I see multiple problems being solved with this work. We have an excess amount of fuel in our forests. Our forest floors are choked out with blackberries and a lot of ladder fuels, right? And when we do the work in the forest, it's regenerative to the forest, but then we take the biomass, the excess biomass, and we turn it into regenerative soil products like biochar and Hugelkultur, and we regenerate agriculture soils. So we're talking about multiple solutions with one effort, right? We're talking birds and stones here.
Right. Do you get any pushback from, say, rewilding folks who just want to leave nature alone, just let it be, let it, let those blackberries grow wild and wherever they want? And
Yes. And this is how I put it. The pendulum swings from clear cut, just destroy everything, to don't touch, which is also destructive in its own way.
Right.
The idea that people are not a part of the ecosystem is silly. We evolved as part of the ecosystem, and before colonialism, this place was managed
Right.
by the indigenous people, by the First Nation people, and they used fire to manage the land so the fires wouldn't be too bad. They didn't fight the fires on the landscape. They just moved when they needed to.
Mm-hmm.
So colonialism happened, and we put these permanent structures we call houses on the landscape and decide to never move, right? That's a problem. So we decided to protect our houses by putting out any fire that starts on the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
That helps create the excess fuel load in our forests.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because I was actually in Paradise a month before the fires. What was that? 2019, 2018?
It's pre-COVID.
Yeah, it's basically as old as my dog because we got our dog from Paradise, a breeder in Paradise, and she had just moved there, and she was there just for a month, and we had seen her property. I don't know how long it had been since the previous owner of that property had touched it, but it was over 100 degrees. It was blazing hot, and it was overgrown with bramble. It was scary. I've never been in a forest fire, but I know about it, and I knew this was a dangerous place to be. And my wife and I, there's one road in and out of there. And my wife and I were talking about it, where this is kind of a dangerous situation. A month later, those fires rolled through and destroyed everything.
Yeah.
And we got to clear it. We got to maintain it.
Yeah. It's not clear cut, and it's not don't touch. It's a balance. And we need to acknowledge that we're a part of the ecosystem and stewards of the land. And stewards of the land need to be actively stewarding the land, and getting away from that disconnects people from the land and causes all kinds of problems.
Okay, we got interrupted by a little tow truck, but now we're back. You were talking about stewardship, and I got to say, you're on TikTok. I usually find everybody on Twitter. There's quite, as one of my last guests, Dr. Heidi Jane Hawkins, says, there's quite a robust academic Twitter. And I want to pitch to you that you should be on there because it's pretty exciting and a great way to share the news. But you're 35, so TikTok's more your jam.
Yeah, I'm 36 now.
Oh, so happy birthday. But I gotta say, your TikTok videos, you make stewardship look like a lot of fun. And you guys have a great time in the forest. You bring the goats along. You're making all kinds of partnerships. And I see a flyer for the 3rd annual Central Oregon Regenerative Weekend.
Yeah.
That sounds great. I mean, again, sounds like a lot of fun.
That weekend is my favorite weekend of the year.
How many people attend?
So we've had a dozen people the last 2 years show up each time. Mm-hmm. But this year we're expanding. We kept it small the first 2 years because of COVID, and we wanted to see what we wanted to turn the event into. But now we're ready to expand, and we're hoping to have a convoy of about 50 vehicles, trucks, trailers. If you're familiar with the Gambler 500, they are this year. So the Gambler 500 started the world's largest public land cleanup.
Oh, wow.
Out of Bend, Oregon. The idea when it first started was to take a $500 hoopty, mm-hmm. just a junk car, and modify it to get as much trash collection space in the vehicle as possible. And then they meet up for a weekend every August, and they go do public land trash cleanup in the Oregon desert, and it's turned into the world's largest public land cleanup.
Wow.
And this year, I reached out to the founder of the Gambler 500. He's started an organization called the Sons of Smoky.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it.
And there's a lot of overlap between his mission and the Rake Force mission. And I asked him if they'd partner, and they said yes. So instead of public land cleanup, trash cleanup, it's public land fuels reduction in the wildland-urban interface around Sisters, Oregon.
Okay. So they focus primarily on trash removal. Okay, not fuel or litter.
Theirs is definitely litter and trash, right? And ours is hazardous fuels.
Right.
But it's the same idea of protecting our public lands. That's the same idea.
And where does the gambling come in?
I don't have my mind wrapped around what gambler means. I don't think there's any gambling involved.
Sounds fun. That sounds good.
But it is a competition. I think there are prizes for most trash pulled out of our public lands. So it turned into like a festival every summer. So
terrific. It sounds great. An annual thing. I can't make it this year. It's October 6th through 8th. Yeah. But maybe next year.
And this year we're having live music for the first time.
Nice.
We have a band from Idaho. They're called Jonathan Warren and the Billy Goats.
Great.
I thought that was fitting for the course event. And next year we're going to try to get some real big like outlaw country, new age folk country artists to come play for the weekend.
Great.
Zach Bryan is a veteran, so if Zach Bryan wanted to come play for us that weekend, that would be pretty sweet.
Nice. Going back to the beginning, how did you discover regenerative agriculture, regenerative principles, and I don't know if you go into permaculture ideas at all, but how did you come into this?
When I got home from Iraq, I came home with pretty severe PTSD. I was drinking heavily. I was depressed. There were points where I was suicidal, and I'd always had an interest in homesteading. In Iraq, I had plans to move to Alaska and do the homesteading thing in Alaska, and then that never worked out. When I got back, I tried to go to school using my GI Bill. I didn't do that successfully. Kept hopping around different majors, dropping out of school, and then I hopped from different jobs for a while and landed in real estate for a few years, and I was successful selling real estate, and that caused burnout because I had to hustle.
Yeah.
I hustled really hard to get leads and convert those leads into sales, a lot of phone calls. And towards the end of my third year in real estate, me and my wife, we moved to Toledo, Washington, to a 5-acre homestead out in the city. And I had started gardening. We'd started raising chickens, and I started to feel good for the first time since I'd been home. And
when did you get home from Iraq?
I deployed in 2009, 2010. So I got home in July 2010.
Okay.
And we moved to Toledo in 2016.
Okay.
And that's when I was introduced to permaculture for the first time.
Oh, wow.
I'd grown large gardens growing up. Every summer in my backyard in Boise, Idaho, we started a large garden. The first year we were homesteading in Toledo, but I was still selling real estate, and real estate gets busy in the spring and summer. So the weeds started overtaking the garden, and I put a post on the local neighborhood Facebook page asking for help pulling weeds. I thought I'd pay some high school kid $15 an hour to pull the weeds in the garden. And this guy, Brian Dennis, responded. He is owner of a 180-acre property in Toledo.
Wonderful.
It was an abandoned summer camp.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got all this summer camp infrastructure, big lodge, lots of cabins, and it's a 180-acre forest. And he responded. They had a bunch of folks living in the cabins, and he brought over like 5 or 6 people, and they knocked out the weeds in my garden in like 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me about his property, which I'd been hearing about through like my neighbors, and I'd been meaning to go check it out. But since I met him that day, I got to go over to his place that day, and he showed me this hillside garden that he'd been working on, and it was this weird word called Hugelkultur.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me how they go pull wood out of the forest, and they use it as a slow release fertilizer in the garden bed, and how the wood stores water and it breaks down over time. They add biochar to the Hugelkultur, and he told me what biochar was, and I was hooked.
Mm-hmm.
Because
right then and there, day one,
I was hooked. It reminded me of actual deer hunting in Idaho growing up,
mm-hmm.
where we'd set up deer camp, and I'd be out collecting firewood in the woods for deer camp. I'd pull logs back to the camp and be chopping up logs, and it just very much reminded me of that, and gave me a good like nostalgic feeling. But instead of burning it, it was going to be used to grow food. And I was like, this is great.
Mm-hmm. So you had never heard of Hugelkultur before?
I hadn't heard of Hugelkultur. I hadn't heard of permaculture.
Okay. But you saw Hugelkultur in his garden, and was it sprouting and abundant? And
Oh yeah, it was growing poppies, it was growing potatoes, Jerusalem artichokes, kale, all like anything. Yeah. It was growing.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you saw that it works right then and there, not just a concept, but it actually was working.
Yeah, and then I got to help. I jumped right in, and we became best friends, and I was over there anytime I had free time, pulling logs and limbs out of the woods, helping them finish this Hugelkultur hillside. I want to say it's about 3/4 of an acre, and it was covered in blackberries.
Mm-hmm.
And we smothered out the blackberries and made this 6-foot deep hillside. I want to say it's like 200 feet by 40 feet, and it's like 6 feet deep of wood chips, and compost.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So one other thing I was wondering about was if you have a lot of before and after pictures, and you guys document projects.
Yep. So he's got before pictures of the blackberry hillside, and we take pictures of that Hugel Hill all the time. So
great. Hugel Hill.
Yep.
Cool. And you were was it earlier this year you got to do a project with the governor at the governor's mansion?
Yep.
That's amazing. So how did they find you to ask you to do that?
Being a veteran, I get opportunities that most people don't. I am a part of a program called the Shepherds Project, which was started by the Washington Farmer Veteran Coalition.
Mm-hmm.
They got the opportunity the FVC has the opportunity to manage the governor's mansion garden. They asked me if I wanted to build a Hugelkultur, and I said absolutely. So our Hugelkultur, our biochar is in the governor's mansion. Earlier this year, we got a grant from the Dauntless Veteran Foundation out of Oregon to purchase a portable sawmill.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to mill some lumber for the raised beds that aren't Hugelkultur.
Okay.
But our wood is part of the raised beds in the governor's mansion as well. So that was a really neat opportunity.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. How long did it take to install?
The Hugelkultur at the governor's mansion isn't very large, but I want to say we worked like 2 weeks on tearing down the old garden beds,
Okay.
new garden beds, and building a Hugelkultur.
Okay. And are you documenting that also?
Yes, that was documented.
Okay. I am tempted to put like a trail cam on that and just do a years long time lapse. It'd be amazing.
That's actually a good idea, with like the fungi that's going to pop out of there.
Yeah. And it eventually will subside, very slowly, but over time will decrease in size and girth.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense? I don't know. I've been looking for papers on Hugelkulturs. There's not a lot written about them, but I'm wondering, do you have a sense of how long they last before the wood is completely turned back into soil?
In our Western Washington wet climate, and the wood that we use being hardwoods, alder, maple, cherry, like cottonwood, it decomposes pretty quickly. I would say 5 to 10 years. And where it's just pure black soil.
That is fast. I often think about just walking in the national forest here in California, and they sort of have they let the trees drop, or they fell trees when they need to, and they just let it sit on the forest floor. They don't do anything. They just let it sit there. And it's going to take decades for it to even start to, look like it's melting back into the forest floor. But with Hugelkultur, you retain the water, you slow release the nutrients, and it decomposes much faster. It looks nicer. I mean, you could have like a tidy looking forest. It just drives me crazy. I don't know why we have this just drop it and leave it policy.
It's about money. It all boils down to money. Who's going to pay for it? They don't want to pay for it. They'd rather pay for endless war than regenerative work.
Mm-hmm. So in 1933, it was post-Depression. There was, I think, 3 million people in the CCC, and they weren't paid a lot, but they were fed and put to work and worked on great projects for this country. Is there broad talk in some circles at least of starting it up again? Do we have to wait for another depression or gigantic recession?
People talk about the CCC and talk about restarting the CCC, and there are like smaller efforts to start civilian conservation corps. The reality is that we need something bigger than the original civilian conservation corps. The work that needs to be done is more than what 3 generations of Americans can handle. Like if we're actually talking about fighting climate change, we need millions of regenerative conservation workers. Mm-hmm. It needs to be funded like an army. And that's my vision for Rake Force. If Joe Biden wanted to take Rake Force and turn it into the next military branch, I'd help do that.
It's not such a crazy idea.
And the
name is perfect.
I mean, it's bipartisan, right?
Yes, 100%.
The former president said, "Rake the forest."
Rake the forest, and it was a big issue, partisan issue.
Yeah.
What is he, crazy? I remember. It was like, yeah, no, that's what we should do.
I mean, we're not going to actually rake. We're not actually going to rake the forest like the duff, and we're not going to take everything, right? We're going to leave snags. We're going to leave habitat piles. We're going to construct habitat piles. The idea is to create good access and to keep fires on the ground, because it's fires aren't bad. It's crown fires that are bad, and it's the wildland urban interface that are burning people's houses down and killing people that are bad. So there's good fire, and what needs to happen is a manual fuels reduction effort to be done, and then prescribed fire is a good idea. So for continued management. So
Yep. So have you, with your adventures on social media, gotten response from people who discovered what you do, or people who already know what you do, or agree with it? What's the response been?
It's been mostly supportive. We do get pushback from foresters west of the Cascades that say, oh, fire's not historically a problem west of the Cascades. The key word there that I have them focus on is historically.
Right.
Not historically been a problem, and that's the thing about change, climate change. It's becoming a problem, and it's a problem now.
Right.
On the west side every year, from Mexico to Canada, the entire west coast is dotted with fire.
Mm-hmm.
We will get pushback from like hardcore environmentalists that say, oh, don't touch it. Like, no, that's wrong too, because humans evolved in the forest landscape, right? We are part of the forest ecosystem, and not touching it is not the solution.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm completely against industrial clear cutting, but I am for a vibrant timber industry.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way we do things needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah. I talked to a Forest Service soil scientist, and he was just telling me, he didn't give me any citation or anything, but he was talking about how the natives they would thin the forest a little bit. They would keep the trees a certain distance apart from each other, and do raking, clearing of fuel and whatnot. And, you look at Yosemite Valley right now, it is just jam-packed with trees. It is choked. It looks kind of dangerous. I mean, it's a matter of time before you have really dry year and really bad conditions for a fire to go through there. Why not just keep it sparse, or medium sparse, or find the right balance? But we got to clear some of it.
I've been lucky to spend some time in Yosemite, in Sequoia. One of my favorite parks is Big Trees State Park in Calaveras County.
Mm-hmm.
It scares me that those trees aren't going to be there in the future, because there's a don't touch management mindset. Obviously, the clear cutting mindset that wiped out 98% of our old growth in this country was wrong.
Right.
It was fucked up, really.
Yeah.
To be very blunt.
Yeah.
What we need is a balance.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get to a balance. I want to say there's a media bias against people being in the forest, and it starts with like when we're children, right? The big bad wolf is in the forest. Bears, dangerous creatures are in the forest, witches.
Voldemort lives in the forest.
Yeah. So the forest is a scary place. That's what the media portrays the forest as. And I believe that's to keep us from going into the forest. A huge part of my PTSD therapy is being in the forest, working on regenerative forest projects with the goats, pulling logs and limbs out to regenerate the forest and regenerate the soil. Just being in the forest has been super good for my PTSD. And I believe there's societal PTSD.
Oh, absolutely.
That people are dealing with.
Yep.
And I believe that this is a major solution for that.
I 100% agree with you. Yeah, and I'm so happy that is something that offers you respite and solace. That's great. The goats. How big is your herd?
We have about 50 goats.
So what do they eat when they go in there?
Whatever's thorny.
Thorny?
They like to eat blackberries. They like to eat thistle.
Mm-hmm.
They'll eat English ivy isn't thorny, but they'll eat English ivy. They'll eat the native species too. So we can't have the goats penned up in one area or they'll decimate the area. But if they're not penned up on that one area, they'll browse. If we keep them moving, which we do, then they don't destroy the forest ecosystem. They're a benefit to the forest system.
I talked with a very interesting sheep farmer in Carpathian Mountains in Poland, Sam Osborne, a few episodes back. And he observed his sheep eating low-hanging branches from the trees.
Yeah.
And he has this wonderful theory about migrating herbivores that have been lost since the Pleistocene, and how that has had a detrimental effect on our forests. They're overgrown. They're not impacted by wild animals. They need that impact. They need to be browsed, and it's good for the animals. And he has a vision of reinstituting migratory patterns through forests and in a managed way, obviously. It's really like, wow, win-win-win, right? It's like benefits everyone. Healthy animals, healthy forests.
Yep. We've done a good job wiping out species that used to be forest managers, right?
Right. Giant sloth, giant beaver.
Mastodon,
Yep.
The mammoth, right? Like all of these creatures were major players in the ecosystem. Their extinction has caused major problems. We've killed predators, right? We killed the bison that created the topsoil in the Great Plains.
The most fertile, largest fertile plain that we know of in the history of anything. It's incredible.
And we wiped it out in less than 100 years.
Yep.
We turned it into a dust bowl.
Yeah, and it's something that obviously people talk about, but they don't talk about it in that context. That they're gone, but we don't talk about what has happened since they've been gone. And it's so obvious. I mean, you had the Dust Bowl itself. What, 50 years after the bison were gone? Something like that. I mean, I don't know, but it was in the 30s and 40s. Ecological devastation.
We wiped the bison out, and the Industrial Revolution was happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
We wiped the bison out, and we started tilling, and we kept tilling, and we kept tilling. We know what happens now. We know, thanks to science.
We still have Dust Bowl problems. That still happens.
We never stopped.
Yeah.
We started spraying chemicals.
Yeah.
And that's more problems, right? All the chemicals sprayed in the Great Plains wash out into our river system, down the Mississippi River, into the Gulf of Mexico, which causes a huge nitrogen excess, which causes a huge algae bloom every year, which causes fish die-off.
Yeah.
We're killing everything by tilling and spraying when we destroyed the bison and when we shot all the wolves, and we demonize any predator that's not human, right?
Right.
Each thing we do is taking something away from the ecosystem that is a critical part of ecosystem management.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
Well, you mentioned that our society, our culture has PTSD. I think we have been living out of balance. And I'm not someone who thinks we are doing everything wrong. I think we are a great country, great nation, great people. We are living in ignorance and in denial of our impact, our negative impact, and we need to change, and we can change, and we know how to do that. So I feel like a great optimism, but we actually need to start doing it, and we can feel better about it. Like, I mean, your feeling of good health and wellness just by doing what you need to be doing in the forest. You found what you need to be doing. I mean, I do you have a sense that this is like your life path now? This is what you're going to do? And
this is how I think about it. I went to the war in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
I believed a lie.
Yep.
That We were going there to fight terrorism, to stop weapons of mass destruction. When I got there and spent the year there, we never left a pipeline, right? We were there for oil. That has caused so many problems within the veteran population, because admitting that truth is a major blow to people's foundations.
Sense of honor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
The way I look at it is, I have a friend who was in the Navy for years. The way I look at it is, you served your country. That's honorable. Your service is not predicated on good or bad leadership. The leaders are going to do what they're going to do regardless. But you offering your service is an honorable, helpful thing.
I had honorable intentions, and when I found out the lie, that was pretty shattering, right? To my
When did you discover that?
When I got there, right?
Okay.
When I got there and I saw the pipelines, when I saw the people of Iraq and I saw these kids coming up to our Humvee asking for pencils and just like being grateful to receive a pencil or a piece of candy, seeing that we were there being the aggressors, I knew I was being lied to, and I acknowledged the lie, but I had to keep lying to myself to make it through, and I had to keep lying to myself when I got back for a long time until I worked stuff out in the forest, and I was able to leave a lot of that rage. When I was overseas, one of my friends, he committed suicide, and I was a combat medic and I had to treat him, right? He was our only casualty that year, and it was our leadership who drove him to suicide. Because of that, I felt dirty. I felt like I was brainwashed, and I just had to stuff that down. I had to stuff it down because I had a platoon that I had to be there for every time we rolled outside of the wire, which is every day. So, and I just had to lie to myself to make it home. And I think that's a big driver in veteran suicide. Acknowledging that truth it's shattering to the foundation, to the core of a person.
Yeah. And if I don't know the numbers, but it seems like this generation of veterans has much higher rate of suicide than previous ones. I mean, is that your sense?
The number is, I would probably say Vietnam, and the Vietnam era and my era is similar. And the Vietnam era veterans had a lot less services than we do, and they talked about it a lot less. It
was new. The concept of PTSD was new. It was called shell shock prior to that, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they didn't, and it was taboo to talk about.
Right.
We need real solutions for these problems, and my view is that my contribution to a destructive war, the opposite of that is a contribution to regenerative work, right?
Amen. Amen.
And that's my view, is I'll be fighting to reverse anthropogenic climate change for the rest of my life.
Well, I thank you for your service doubly. It's impressive what the realizations that you've come to and are implementing in your life. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you work with other veterans?
Yes. And with Rake Force, the goal is to hire as many veterans as we can.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to gain traction, grant writing. We're starting to get private contracts rolling, and we're going to be able to start hiring full-time employees very soon.
Amazing.
And I have a veteran preference. We're not exclusive. We're inclusive because everybody's in the same boat.
Yep.
I see the benefits of this work for my veteran comrades, and I have a heart for them. So I'm definitely recruiting. And Rake Force started in 2020 in part because quarantine and isolation is not good for veterans.
No.
And we have this amazing 180 acre space that was a former summer camp that we could meet outside with social distance and have community. So we started hosting regenerative agroforestry workshops. And the first workshop we hosted in September of 2020 was when the idea for Rake Force started. We had about a dozen veterans on an acre. In an afternoon, we were able to clear the excess fuels and start building a giant Hugelkultur in my front yard. I told a joke about the president saying rake the forest and then starting Space Force, and it hit. And we're like,
Yeah.
It has to be Rake Force.
Yeah, that's awesome.
This is what it has to look like, and we're working on building it.
Terrific. Yeah, you gotta put those shirts up for sale, and I'll be buying one for sure.
We just got done a couple weeks ago with a grant application, a National Science Foundation Convergence Accelerator grant with the University of Washington, Oregon State University. Both heads of the forestry department are like backing Rake Force's work and have taken leadership in the grant that we're pursuing. We've got Washington Department of Natural Resources on board to provide
amazing
locations to do the work. And then we've got the Nature Conservancy as a partner, and multiple other conservation.
Have you talked with Andrew Millison at Oregon State University?
I'm like one connection away from Andrew.
You need to talk to him. Yeah, he's an incredible educator, permaculture educator. He runs a course out of Oregon State and does work around the world. But I mean, you guys need to meet and talk.
Yeah, if you want to make a connection, that would be great.
I don't know him, but I know someone who knows him. So
yeah. I'm one step away from connecting with Andrew. So if I try, I could connect with
It's
him.
because you're not on Twitter. It's because you're spending your time on TikTok. So you need to get over to, X, right?
Yeah.
You need to be on X. It all sounds amazing. Yeah, I've seen a couple posts you did about you got a $75,000 grant. Where was
our value-added producer grant for biochar?
Yeah, explain that. Value-added producer. I like the sound of that.
So the USDA offers a value-added producer grant. The idea is to take low-grade products and make that, do value addition on top of that. So our idea is to take our goat manure and mix it with biochar. The biochar that we make from low-grade forest products, low-value forest products, and we're going to make a goat manure biochar blend. We have been applying for this grant for 3 years, and this is the third year was the charm.
Amazing.
And
so this is to sell a product. It's to help you get a product ready for market.
Yep. So this first year is a planning grant. So we'll have experts in the biochar field help us with our biochar business plan. We have a marketing expert coming to help us with marketing. It'll pay for like packaging for our biochar blends, and get us rolling that way. And then next year we're eligible to apply for $250,000 for things like equipment, and we'll cover some salaries and get us rolling that way.
Amazing.
The dream is to purchase a biochar kiln that is also an energy capture system and generator, because the biochar process is an energy producer.
Yeah.
There's a company out of Berkeley, California called All Power Labs, and they make a biochar kiln called the Power Pallet.
Okay.
And it produces energy and biochar, and it produces 25 kilowatts.
Wow. Wow.
It's not a small amount of power. It's a decent amount of power. And my idea is to buy a Power Pallet and a Ford Lightning to be able to go zero emissions.
Again, I want to promote X. There's a Tesla Cybertruck. I don't know if you've heard about this thing.
When I see the Cybertruck, I'll believe the Cybertruck.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Been, 6 years?
Yeah. It did win a battle. I don't know if you saw the tug of war it did with the Lightning. It did win.
When I see Cybertrucks, I'll believe the Cybertruck.
I keep in my mind seeing the Cybertruck in the forest, hauling things, hauling trailers.
Until then, we have the Ford Lightning. We have the Rivian as an option.
Yeah, the Rivian's nice.
But the Ford is probably the cheapest option we have right now. And I see us making biochar to charge the electric truck and the electric truck, delivering biochar to different farmers and clients.
Oh, that'd be incredible.
That's my dream.
Yeah. Okay. Adding on to that dream, you bring a battery of chargers, have the kiln power those chargers, and power a multi-charging station. So
Yes.
cars can come to the parking lot. Anyway, yeah.
That's I've got a friend that I deployed with. He does drone technology.
Oh, cool.
He has electric autonomous all-terrain vehicles.
Wow.
That we've been using.
Really?
To pull biomass out of the forest. And he has been in logistics for a long time, and we've been talking about battery banks, like shipping containers full of batteries that we charge out by making biochar and delivering them to car charging stations.
Amazing. So robots clearing forests.
Yeah.
Amazing. And this is happening?
With people, though.
Okay.
Not cutting people out of the equation.
Okay.
We're just making the work easier on the people.
Got it. Hauling. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Incredible. Okay, so I'm imagining a work crew goes out in the forest, clears a bunch of fuel, doesn't haul everything out, but maybe is leaving Hugelkulturs in their wake, right?
No, we'll call them habitat piles.
Habitat piles?
Yeah.
Okay. Increasing the soil sponge, harvesting rainwater. What's the biggest hugelkultur you've ever worked on?
200 feet by 50 feet by 4 feet deep.
So 50 feet wide.
200 foot long.
And 4 feet deep, but so is that 4 feet above the surface? Okay. Wow. That's huge.
Yep.
Where's that? At your house?
It was at the last farm that I was at, and it didn't work out to purchase that place. But the soil there is going to be, it's about the work, right?
Yeah.
The work is done everywhere, so it's not
a loss. Nothing lost. Yeah. Amazing. So what is the thickest log that you've ever put in the ground?
I mean...
And is there a limit? Okay, that's pretty big.
I mean, I try to stick the big logs on the outside of the hugelkultur. We call them attractive side pieces. So they're like the border of the hugelkultur, and then we infill with like smaller stuff. But
because I've seen it advised not to go too big.
I live by the principle that rules suck. If it breaks down in the forest, it's going to break down in a hugelkultur. They say don't use cedar in a hugelkultur because cedar doesn't break down, but there's some cedar in the forest. Some cedar's not going to destroy a hugelkultur. Now, if you're using only cedar, that's wrong, but that's as a monoculture.
Yeah, you want to be putting all kinds of things in there.
Absolutely. Any monocrop, any monoculture is gonna cause problems. So
what are the kinds of things that you put in a typical hugelkultur? Just things that are around, or do you put like kitchen scraps and all kinds of wacky stuff in there?
Yeah, we do logs and limbs. We'll chip stuff up, and we'll chips. We'll add hog fuel, which is a timber industry waste product. We'll add sawdust, which is another timber industry waste product. And then we'll add all kinds of nitrogen, horse shit, goat shit, kitchen scraps. We'll bury dead animals in a hugelkultur.
What layer would you put an animal?
I mean, bury it.
At the bottom.
Bury it 2 or 3 feet deep, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And exciting. I keep trying to think of a camera system that you could bury in like a trail cam and do a long-term time lapse. But I mean, there's no light. I mean, how would it'd be amazing to see, a time lapse of this stuff, the processes, but it's almost just as fun to think about it in your imagination over time, these things breaking down.
We'll leave the end of the hugelkultur exposed sometimes and put like a plexiglass viewing window. And that's the closest you can get to seeing the breakdown. But it gets messy, and it definitely is more like an imaginative, like it would look good as a piece of art.
Yeah.
Rather than like a camera.
Right.
But a camera would be cool just to see like what mushrooms are popping out of logs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We have oftentimes we have first year oyster mushrooms pop out of our hugelkulturs. Oh, and then morels pop out of the grass next to the hugelkultur that we build. So,
and you don't inoculate with those? They just
nope.
Oh wow.
They come pre-inoculated.
Right. Amazing.
The whole Rake Force concept is to be a fighting force against anthropogenic climate change. We've seen major problems in the forest and in agriculture soil and in society's mental health.
Yeah.
We see these solutions that can be easily applied on a mass scale. Yeah, we just need support.
Yeah. I'm imagining you're getting some press. You must. I mean, you're doing projects at the governor's mansion in Washington. You've been written about, I'm sure.
We've been in local papers. There's a chance we're going to be featured on NBC this fall. I think NBC is going to be showing up at a regenerative weekend.
Oh, terrific.
We're gaining more media attraction, and when that happens, the money's going to start flowing more.
Right.
So.
Well, terrific, Jake. This is all good news, and again, I thank you for your service in both areas, as a soldier and as another soldier. It's incredible, and I gotta have a shirt.
We'll be making shirts soon.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.